Protection Society was formed over 50 years ago to protect the heritage of the Solent and to ensure its quiet enjoyment by a variety of users, hence our interest in safety and the reason why we are here tonight. Nowadays we concern ourselves mostly with consultations on any legislation concerning the Solent. We pay close attention to all planning applications for buildings that can be seen from the water, as we find that local authorities are much more likely to be concerned about the view from the land than from the water. And the Society is concerned about the ecology of the Solent and the laws that relate to it. The Solent Protection Society is the only body which is in no way government funded, having an interest across the whole of this beautiful area. As a charity, we rely on people such as yourselves becoming members and supporting us. If you have not yet checked our new website, please do so. It is very good and very interesting. The title of this lecture is The 21st Century Coastguard. I'm sure that the audience will contain an above average number of sceptics who are immediately anxious to hear of any government body or agency that is being reorganised in the name of efficiency. However, those on the Solent Protection Society Council who have been following the reports of the changes in the Coastguard are cautiously optimistic. The changes in technology in the last 20-30 years have been truly astounding, and it would be unreasonable if full use was not taken of these developments by the Coastguard. We do need, however, to be reassured that the baby is not thrown out with the bathwater and that the 21st century is genuinely better than the 20th. We are therefore very pleased to welcome Geoff Matthews to speak to you tonight. Geoff is a Coastguard staff officer working from the national headquarters here in Southampton, and he has been appointed interim manager of the new National Operations Centre in Fareham. It is clear that we could not have asked for a more highly qualified speaker.
Jeremy. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. You'll have to pardon me while I get used to the microphone. The volume, my voice is normally relatively loud, as some will testify to. The 21st Century Coastguard that I'm going to talk about tonight is the experience of the Coastguard. It's the Coastguard story. And I'm going to be bringing it up to date. I will not be allowed or at any time talk about government policy. That's not in my remit, nor will I give a personal opinion. So tonight we'll talk about, as we go through, the history and remit of Her Majesty's Coastguard. We'll talk about the national context, because although you're very interested in a local region of the United Kingdom, I can't talk about the 21st Century Coastguard unless it's in the national context. We'll talk a little bit about SAR aviation. SAR is the terminology for search and rescue, and you'll hear me shorten that almost invariably throughout the lecture. And I'll talk about the other resources that are available to Her Majesty's Coastguard. And then we'll loop it up with how it's likely to affect the Solent. Her Majesty's Coastguard is the oldest national emergency service in the United Kingdom. The origins root back into the Water Guard that was formed in the late 1700s, separated out into the Revenue Service, and in the early days, the early 1800s, one of the duties we had was to stand and guard wrecks on the coast of the United Kingdom to ensure that the good citizens of the United Kingdom didn't enhance their own lifestyle by raiding the things. At that point, of course, somebody said, well, while you're standing around there, why don't you rescue the poor souls on board the ship? And thereby came our first rescue duties. The Coast Guard, in 2 words, came into being in 1822, the 15th of January, 1822. 22. So we've just had our 192nd birthday. Thank you very much. We had a variety of masters throughout the 19th century, Board of Trade, Admiralty. We dotted backwards and forwards. Finishing the century and starting the new century, the 20th century, in the hands of the Admiralty as a naval reserve. We saw service in the First War. The sinking of 3 elderly warships, almost entirely crewed by Coastguard officers and Coastguardsmen from around the United Kingdom, saw a decimation of the service. The Admiralty pulled all the Coastguards back off ships and redeployed them around the coast so as not to lose the expertise. In 1825, we became the full-time property, if you like, of the Board of Trade. 1960, we became a 999 service and joined the blue light services of the fire brigade, police and ambulance. In the 1980s, we pulled back from lookouts on the coast, and an interesting fact's just come to light in that amid all the protests of the 1980s about stopping a lookout service and coming back into maritime rescue coordination centres where we'd be listening to radios rather than looking out the windows. That was first proposed in 1931. In 1971, we contracted our first rescue helicopter in Manston, and we've been contracting helicopter search and rescue ever since. That's something to munch on. So our statutory obligation, this is a statement made on 15th of March 1992 by the then Secretary of State. Her Majesty's Coastguard is responsible for the initiation and coordination of civil maritime search and rescue. He followed up with saying this includes the cliffs and coastline, shoreline of the United Kingdom. So what does that job look like? I'm a coastguard, I've been sat on the coast for 5 years at Solent MRCC. I've got a young officer up at the back there who works in another MRCC. 500 men and women, probably one of the smallest government agencies, all officers, look after, sorry, this is a new one for me, part of our statutory function, vessel traffic monitoring and category 1 responder. But our search and rescue region looks like this: 1.25 million square miles of sea. Goes right out to 30 west, butts up against the Canadian search and rescue region, Iceland to the north, Portugal and Spain to the south, France, Netherlands, Belgium, all the way round the Benelux countries and up through Norway. It's not the largest search and rescue region, that belongs to Australia. From single MRCC, Australia look up to 10% of the Earth's water surface, over 10 million square miles. Okay, so we've got 1.25 million square miles. We've got something in the order of 11,000 miles of coastline, including the outlying islands. That's really an estimate, because actually nobody has physically measured the coastline to every nook and cranny, so it's a best guess. Now we start moving into the wider world. The International Maritime Organisation, IMO, and the EU following on have identified that there are 10 functions carried out by various coastguard organisations around the world. We're the only single national emergency service, I've said that already. We're also the only emergency service with true international links, agreements, instruments and statutory obligations. So we look to the IMO for guidance. So Her Majesty's Coastguard, Our primary function, everybody sees as search and rescue. Pollution response. People are probably a little less aware about that, but have some awareness. Vessel traffic management. The EU Vessel Traffic Management Directive is part of our remit. It's new missions coming on stream. Maritime safety. Anybody who's been to sea in the Solent or around the UK has listened to maritime safety information broadcasts or received them on Navtex receivers. Accident and disaster response. All sorts of areas get involved in there, but primarily from our point of view in Her Majesty's Coastguard, we are a Category 1 responder, placed at the same level as the police, fire and ambulance, and required to respond to emergencies that are within our competence as a maritime authority. And finally, a very new area for us is maritime security. The other four are carried out, as you can clearly see, by differing agencies in government. So the structure of Her Majesty's Coastguard. It's varied over the years. The current structure looks like some 15 maritime rescue coordination centres and a dedicated London centre for the River Thames from the barrier up to Teddington. This means that in the setup we have 9 data centres, 9 isolated pockets containing the information that coastguards need to do their jobs. And we have 164 remote radio sites, and we'll look a bit more in detail at that aspect of it in a few minutes. So, fairly wide-ranging organisation. The challenges with this is that it's relying on relatively early technology. It's very, very difficult to get information and communications from one data centre to another. As you gathered from 9 data centres, it means that most of the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centres work in pairs. So they exchange information and communications between themselves, but outside that loop, it's rather more difficult. It also means that if one of those data centres fails, that we have lost an overview and communications with a complete discrete portion of the coastline. That, I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, is not resilience in our modern thinking. 15 years ago, this was considered state-of-the-art. And why not? It was using absolute bang-up-to-date modern technology. Nowadays, it just doesn't fit the bill. So we've just gone through a complete refresh of our radio equipment. And we're starting a new build. The future looks like this. A single national maritime operations centre. We got a very nice building from part of the Fire Brigade Regional Control Centre project. Purpose-built operations centre and data centre that we were allowed to buy and then configure for Coastguard use. Just so happens that it's in Fareham in Sedgensworth, Kites Croft, if anybody's whistling past. It's a superb facility that currently contains desks, computers, data centres, but no Coastguard officers. We'll have 9 Coastguard operating centres, plus the dedicated centre at London. 1 data centre, a single data centre, split into 2 halves, each with two halves, one in Aberdeen, one in Fareham, connected by diverse routed wide area network. Means that we have 4 chances of going wrong. If 1/4 of the data centre fails, one server fails, the other 3 will pick up the work.
If 2 fail?
If 2 fail, the other 2 will pick up the work. If 3 fail, the final server can carry and does carry 100% of our data and communications links. Okay, so it's got to be pretty disastrous for us to get to that state if we've got IT technicians
monitoring
the network and dealing with faults as they occur. But if it does, we also have a disaster recovery site which runs isolated from the network and from the internet, but carries the latest stable version of our data set. And that means that we fold back to the International Maritime Organisation's baseline position for any Coast Guard organisation, in that it can conduct operations in the GMDSS only. So you will get a very, very basic service. Other services will hand out to other national authorities. We'll ask the French to do our MSI broadcast for us, for instance. But that's an absolute disaster. And that means a really bad virus attack on the network that's absolutely killed the network. How likely that is to happen, we don't know. But it's got to be a real disaster. That's why it's called a disaster recovery site. We'll go cheerful again. 164 remote radio sites. We still have 164 left at the end. All of them with new radio equipment in there. But we're not just refreshing the radio equipment, we're also refreshing the way we link. Because each of these radio sites, or 80 of these radio sites, will link to 3 places. Each data centre and the disaster recovery centre. So whatever happens at 80 locations, will still have GMDSS communications. So the concept of operations is a single national service in one virtual operations room. That means the Maritime Operations Commander at Fareham will be able to look at, speak to and direct every Coast Guard in the country. Not by telephone, but on an intercom. We're talking about the next level down, the controllers of the network, when they're on duty, controlling teams of officers. 1 or 2 might be at Fareham, but others might be in Aberdeen, Shetland, Stornoway, Swansea, Milford Haven, wherever. But they'll all be operating in a single operations room with a distant horizon. Has to be distant, we go out to 30 west, but we also have an obligation to be aware of the UK shipping red flag, red ensign interests wherever the red ensign is flying. We're going distant. Proactive risk mitigation and detection. As more systems come on stream, with the automatic identification system, long-range information and tracking, the plethora of satellite data communications links that we've got accessible to us really mean that we can look at vessels of interest as they approach our waters. We'll be warned off by other nations of the EU that these vessels are coming in and that they've suffered a problem, and that perhaps we should keep an eye on them. We can track them through our waters and see them safely away where they're not going to damage or interfere with our environment. Or if they become involved in a further incident, we have proactively put in place the measures and structures to be able to deal with them safely with minimal impact to the UK maritime domain. Multiple sensors. We've already got radar, and had radar for years in the English Channel. We've been conducting the sunk VTS service, and we conduct the Channel Navigation Information Service. With the amount of shipping that goes through the United Kingdom, Dover Strait, on an annual basis, a fairly heavy burden that we bear with the French. And we cooperate very closely with them. But also, we have access to sensors right around the world in the UK. And all this data, all these communication links, will be available to every Coast Guard officer in the country, depending on how they dial in to a particular profile, and that will be given to them on the day. So they'll be able to talk to, if they need to, any lifeboat they want to in the country. They'll be able to pick up any radio aerial they need to in the country. Any harbour or port authority, the telephone number will be available for them to use. We won't give them all that information all at the same time though, because nobody really, realistically, needs that kind of information. So we'll zone them down. Flexible working. We can move work and resource around. So imagine the picture of an officer in a Coast Guard operations centre working search and rescue. The team around him are building into search and rescue operations. The incident level is rising. They're becoming overloaded. So the controller will take away routine telephone calls from them and pass them to an operating centre that is less engaged. All right? Now, if you call the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre a busy one in the summer, and they're incident working and they're maxed out, you'll normally get the response, please call back later, we're incident working. And the phone will go dead. Or you'll hear the broadcast go out. There will be no maritime safety information broadcast because we're incident working. The new network, that will never happen.
For a start,
The maritime safety information broadcast
will be
managed separately and centrally. We'll do that from one Coast Guard operating centre or another. They'll all have the capability of broadcasting that in a semi-automated system. Routine telephone calls passed to different officers around the country who are not engaged in search and rescue, but still have the knowledge to answer weather and tidal queries, safety queries, and so on and so forth, the day-to-day stuff of Coast Guards. We can move the resource around. So if we have an officer sat in a Coast Guard operating centre who's not engaged in something, and yet another officer on another team needs somebody to conduct Coast Guard business, we ask the disengaged officer to log out of their current profile, log into the new profile, speak to the mission coordinator and pick up a task. All the information will be presented to him to be able to conduct that task. Because he's a trained Coast Guard officer, he'll be able to conduct that business. Communications and information. We've talked about those radio sites. The government, Her Majesty's government, years and years ago, signed up to the GMDSS, the Global Maritime Distress and Safety System, and agreed to monitor the A1 and A2 areas and A3 areas. 30 miles out from the coast, 100 miles out from the coast, and that broad broad band right around the middle of the Earth, 70 north to 70 south, by satellite technology. So these govern the area A1 and A2, giving, I won't say complete coverage, but very nearly complete coverage on the whole coast of the UK. Obviously, if you've got craggy bits around Scotland and some of the off-lying islands, then we do still have problems. But here on the south coast, by and large, we've got 100% coverage. Those 80 primary radio sites are the GMDSS ones. They have digital selective calling and the best channel 16 transmitters and receivers on board them. They'll be the primary sites, the ones that we fall back to in the event of a disaster. 999 emergency calls will come into the central network, and according to where the call is generated from, be passed back out to the officers, the teams who are monitoring that area. Totally integrated telephone system that will allow us to pass routine calls wherever they're needed or we want them to be presented within the network. Teleconnect. Has anybody ever had the misfortune on board a boat to have a medical problem and ask the Coast Guard for advice? If you have, and you do through your VHF radio, first thing the Coast Guard will do is connect you by the telephone system to a doctor who has experience of shipboard injuries. That's a teleconnect system, so we can connect radios to telephones, and we can have a conference call with up to 6 different elements in it. Various data points from satellite imagery, not only for search and rescue, but for communications around the world and for pollution detection. And it's very interesting to see some of the data that we get from these satellites, because you can see when a ship's gone down the Irish Sea and has pumped out some oil in its bilge water, and you can see a trail 150 miles long, and it points right at the ship. So that when our surveyors go on board, tap on the captain's shoulder and gently say, "Oi, you," we can fingerprint the ship directly. Immensely powerful. Is there a Bond in the house? And we've got complete automatic identification system. If anybody's looked at this system, as it says it's automatic, but it's ships transmitting various voyage and dynamic and ship data to us at a rate that corresponds with the speed they're moving at.
So it tells us...
It tells us the name and flag of the vessel, its tonnage and so on and so forth, but it will tell us the cargo, whether it has dangerous goods on board. It'll give us dynamic voyage information, that is to say its course, speed, rate of turn, and so on and so forth. We can do closest point of approach calculations with this. This microphone's giving out, I think. And along with that, long-range information and tracking, which is the same system but on a satellite detection. So now we can see ships approaching European and UK waters right out in the middle of the Atlantic and beyond, and be able to track them all the way through our waters and onto their destination. We're also looking at world-leading drift modelling software. This is where we have, for instance, a drifting boat. We can calculate with dynamic weather information provided by the Met Office its drift, where it's likely to end up. This means we can do search and rescue activities on a variety of search objects, from a person in the water through to life rafts and different types of vessels. And we're purchasing right now the latest piece of equipment that will allow us to do that. Those are the GODSS areas that I spoke about, A1 in that horrible pink. Okay, and gradually as we go through this transition period, you're going to see these names disappear. What you won't see disappear are the MMSIs. We intend to keep those live and feed those into our system on an area basis. So it will still come through the aerial site to the officer monitoring the area that the call emanated from. So the light blue area up there is the A2 area, and then the wider Atlantic A3. The A4 area is governed for us by another national authority who has the equipment to do it. So, resources. We've talked about communications, we've talked about data. We currently have 64 sectors in the Coastal Rescue Organisation, part of Her Majesty's Coastguard, and you'll see some of these guys and girls winging through the coastal villages on their way to various emergencies. These are our people on the ground. Volunteers, governed by an increased staff from 64 to 104 to give us better training and governance over them so that they can react quicker, react more appropriately and keep themselves and the public safe. 400 Coast Guard rescue teams in coastal towns and villages. Now, if you live on the Solent, then Hayling Island Coast Guard rescue team, Portsmouth Coast Guard team, Hillhead, Southampton, Livington, they're all there, they're all doing the business and will do into the future. 3,500 volunteers. That's fairly good for an organisation with over 500 regular officers in it. And they're trained and equipped, and it depends on their locality, but for the rescue environment they're working in. So we've got rope rescue teams, mud rescue, water safety, and they're all trained in general search. This is the hardest aspect of rescue. Mud rescue is the most tiring, most physiologically demanding. Had great fun though. Rope rescue. Interestingly, our rope rescue gear is the most versatile available to a rescue service anywhere in the United Kingdom. To the point that we are often called in for incidents where other emergency services can't get to a casualty. Only our equipment is versatile enough, and our guys have the right training to be able to adapt it and conduct a rescue. And our smart blue and yellow vehicles. Some of them have gone silver, by the way, so, and the livery's changing slightly, but that's not to say it's any less effective a vehicle. Right, let's talk about search and rescue aircraft. Okay. How long have we been doing this business? Note the colours. Okay, 1971 was the first time we contracted search and rescue aviation. That was British Airways.
Sorry, no, that was Bristow's
down
in
Manston. Okay. We contracted in the early 80s with British Airways to fly search and rescue missions for us under our colours. And in 1988, if I remember rightly, because I saw her inaugural flight, Coastguard Rescue India Juliet flew her inaugural flight out of Daedalus. That was with the Bristow's crew. All ex-military. They came out of SAR services as the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force. But a civilian crew. And I don't think anybody can say that those men and women haven't done as good a job as the MOD, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. They go out in the same conditions and they bring people back. But we do have a certain fondness for that rather noisy yellow barge. Now 35 years old or more, the Sea King aircraft. And the Royal Navy one. And they're currently conducting operations from, in the case of the Royal Air Force, 6 bases around the country, and the Royal Navy 2. The MOD are withdrawing from civil, maritime and United Kingdom search and rescue in entirety, and they've expressed the desire to do that by 2018, but that will certainly go ahead earlier. So, a new contract, new aircraft, SAR harmonisation. You've all probably heard the figures on the contract, 1.3 billion, 10 years of delivery. And that's what it looks like, 10 bases. Now bear in mind that these aircraft fly 10 to 15% faster than the old aircraft. We've positioned them differently so that actually it evens out the delivery. These aircraft are not maritime search and rescue aircraft. These aircraft are United Kingdom search and rescue aircraft. So you will see these aircraft flying through the mountains of Scotland to do search and rescue in the mountains. You will see them taking sick babies from Liverpool to Great Ormond Street. They will crisscross the country providing the current national search and rescue service right the way across the UK. And they'll do it quicker and cleaner. They're vastly more capable aircraft. The crews will almost certainly be 90% ex-military. The only ones that won't be ex-military are the current CHC crews that have come in and been trained alongside the military. The guys, ladies and gentlemen, down
That's Solent.
in Portland, up in Sunborough and Stornoway. Aircraft, and they're interspersed evenly around the country to provide the best response speed and capability where it's needed. We don't need a massive heavy lift aircraft in the English Channel. We can do the job with a slightly smaller medium lift aircraft. So places like Manston will have an S92, the heavyweight, that will go out into the North Sea. So will Newquay. St Athan will have a 189. Solent will have a 189. Now the 189 is slightly bigger by a couple of metres than the current AW139. So it gives us a bigger lift capacity, but the same speed as the AW139. So it gives us a much more interesting mix. Overall, as a United Kingdom service, based on the current figures provided by the Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Centre, with this service in place, we can reduce the response time to arrival on scene by 3 minutes on a national basis to every hotspot in the country. That doesn't mean to say that we favour one region over another. We need to provide the same service to everyone across the UK, and we can do it like this. There we go. Talk about the RNLI, Royal National Lifeboat Institute. So beloved of us all, the most UK British of all systems. We don't own these boats. These are all volunteers, more men and women in coast towns around the UK, providing volunteers on a massive organisation, 232 lifeboat stations at the last count, and beach lifeguard units and all the rest that goes with it. We have to ask for their boats. When we need a lifeboat, Her Majesty's Coastguard own very, very few boats. So we ring up the lifeboat operations manager and say, please can we have your boat? Once we've explained the situation to them, they'll say yes or no. Away the boat goes, crewed by RNLI crew, no coastguards on board, but we coordinate their activities because we've got a nice stable ops room. Hopefully it's not rocking around too much. But we can do the chart work and the detailed planning that will allow them to go to the correct part of the sea and pull out of the water the correct casualties. And it's a system that's worked by and large for nearly 200 years in similar format. Interestingly, the first 2 gold medals won by the were Coast Guard officers back in the 1800s for rescues where they swam out to ships with a line in order to conduct the rescue. There you go. And that's a very moody shot of a lifeboat in Northern Ireland. Additional resources, of course, we can call on almost anybody we need to. Other vessels and boats at sea, Ministry of Defence, Police, Fire Brigade, Ambulance. They're all in there, port and harbour authorities. And at one stage or another, they all come to our assistance because they know that when they need help, they come to us, we go and help them. That relationship with all those is not going to change. And we also talk to the local authorities because they govern patches of the coastline, so we interact with them almost continually. Quick rundown of Solent Coastguard facts and figures so that you know. 340 miles of coastline, 2,400 square nautical miles of sea, so it runs from Beachy Head to Chewton Bunny. That's the Dorset Hampshire border. They've got 10 significant ports and harbours to monitor, 5 local ferry routes, international ferry routes, cruise ship visits, cargo and petrochemical terminals. And, at the last count, about 48,000 marina berths. So as you can imagine, there's a degree of activity going on here. They monitor 6 remote radio sites, 3 of which are primary, 10 Coast Guard rescue teams, 12 lifeboat stations with 5 all-weather lifeboats, 11 inshore boats, and then 6 independent rescue. Fair amount of resource. It is actually the most RNLI rescue organisation type environment that we have around the UK. They're so close together, they're packed in. Doesn't mean to say they're fighting over casualties or incident figures, but there's enough of them to do the job. But it takes a degree of governance. And currently, for the last few years, they've been doing around about 2,000 search and rescue incidents a year. So it's a busy station. How many people have driven past it? How many people know where it is? Oh, yeah. It's on the seafront, Leon Solent, just next to the old hovercraft slip. Okay. It's an elderly Georgian house.
The top floor is
Given over to the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre. And as you can imagine, occasionally bits and pieces fall off it. When you're maintaining an old house, bits and pieces fall off them. Okay. But it's done its job. And the men and women in there have been working supremely for many, many years, working with the Solent, and I imagine many of you have spoken to them on one occasion or another. So, as we move through the area from Beachy Head, we're going to divide things up slightly differently. The area will be governed by 3 zones. There'll be more zones down to the west, more up to the east. Don't worry about the zones, they're just for us. Each of them will have remote radio sites in it. So on a quiet day, did I just say the quiet word? It's normally disaster in the Maritime Operations Centre. On a quiet day, they might be looking after 3 or even 4 zones. A team of 3 or 4 men and women. All the resources available to them, any telephone call that comes into them, emanating from within the zone, will be directed to them. As it gets busier, we strip away the zones and give them a focus so that they can focus in on the zones. And the zones are being configured so that roughly in a year each zone receives about the same number of search and rescue incidents. So we haven't done this just by putting our hand on the chart and drawing around it. This is about calculating what people can handle. We can increase the size of the team, we can move people around, we can move work away from them. So we can shrink the area that they manage, so they can focus in on it, take some of their work away, so they can concentrate on the important business they're conducting. That makes sense. But if you ring the Coastguard number, you'll be presented with a Coastguard who will answer your query. If it's a routine query, they'll be able to talk about tides for your locality. We've just bought a monster piece of software for doing tides. They'll be able to talk about maritime safety. They'll be able to talk about the advisability of conducting search and rescue operations.
They'll be
Able to talk about
time expired pyrotechnics.
excuse me. They'll be able to talk about time expired pyrotechnics. They'll have the information that you need for your locality at their fingertips. If that makes sense. So, that's all I've really got to say at this time. This system is ongoing. We're building it now. It is going ahead. We're in transition. We're recruiting for the new structure now and will be for the next 3 or 4 months. The Maritime Operations Centre in Fareham has been built. It's got the desks and workstations in it. It's got the data centres in it. And we're preparing coastguards around the country for the transition. Working through the dates. And the transition will be achieved by December 2015. Does anybody have any questions?
Are you recruiting local people?